Elation and jubilation gamers from all around the world. I am Lucian, the World Gamer. Welcome to a show where we talk about everything gaming. And today I have a very special guest here with me, Jeremy Blaustein, legendary translator, voice director, and absolute authority in video games localization. Welcome, Jeremy, and thank you so much for being here with us today.
Hi, Lucian. It's great to be here. Thanks.
Thank you. So, guys, he's worked on some of the best and most classic video games ever. If you love games from the 90s and the 2000s, you probably experienced his work. His curriculum is super stellar, with games ranging from Metal Gear Solid to the Silent Hill series, but also Shenmue and classic RPGs like Suikoden 2, Valkyrie Profile, Bundle of Hearts, Shadow of Hearts. So I mean, guys, he's the one who came up with the name Codec for Metal Gear Solid 1 in the now iconic phrase, "What is a man?" from Castlevania Symphony of the Night. So just wow. I mean, the more I think about it, the more it just blows my mind. And that's not even mentioning your role as a voice director and your work on localizing and translating the anime adaptation of a little series you guys might have heard of called Pokemon. So Jeremy, you had a hand in everything I love. You made my childhood, and I'm sure that of our viewers today in some shape or form. So it's an honor to have you here, Jeremy. Thanks again.
Thank you. I think that's a great introduction. Thank you. I feel on top of the world after that introduction.
Great. So, I gathered some notes to help me because we have a lot to talk about. So first, we will be going through some of your most iconic works like Metal Gear, Silent Hill, but then I'd like to talk more about the actual process of localization, of how it works, how it differs from the concept of simply translation. And lastly, I'd like to, discover a little bit more about the man behind the legend. So guys, I strongly recommend you to stick around until the end of the video. But now, I'd say, if it's okay with you, let's jump right in.
Hey, how you doing?
Metal Gear Solid 1 is one of my favorite games. So the first question that I have for you is, how did you come up with the name Codec, and what's the story there?
Okay. I started translating Metal Gear Solid after receiving, I was working in Massachusetts. I had left Konami many years before. And I got a request to translate this because what I had done, I think the first game I did for Konami was Vandal Hearts. And then I think the second one I did might have been Castlevania. And after that was Metal Gear. I got 3 giant blue binders. One of them had the script, one of them had a lot of background art, and one had kind of the setting, a lot of technical details about the stages and stuff like that. So I was working in Massachusetts, and I had 6 months to translate. It took me 6 months. In the process of translating it, as I read through all of the copious notes that Mr. Kojima had left in there, I felt I had a pretty good idea of his worldview. And of course, there was kind of a near futuristic technology was all over the place, everything very cutting edge. But when I got to the communications device that Snake was using, in Japanese it was musenki, which is simply wireless, like a wireless radio. Maybe like a walkie-talkie or something like this. But if you read the text, it was described as, containing this, this burst technology, stimulates the bones of the ear, etc., etc. And it just didn't seem right to call it a wireless. And I already had to do quite a lot of reverse engineering of what Kojima had done in terms of technology. He had read a lot of things in, well, I don't know if he read them in English, but he read them in Japanese, yeah, and he put them in the game. So it's very difficult to figure out what he was referring to. I knew he was referring to advanced technology in some cases, but all the stuff with the shape-shifting metal and things like this, and the nuclear the way the nuclear codes are used, etc. like this. So I had to do a lot of research. But yeah, I decided that wireless radio just didn't fit the worldview that. So I searched through a lot of technical magazines put out there by like advanced kind of like spyware, things like this. Just trying to read as much as I could about what technology this could possibly be referring to, you know. Of course, it wasn't real, but I came across a term that I didn't know, which was codec, which stands for compression, decompression. Codec, compression, decompression. And I thought, oh, well, that sounds a lot like what Mei Ling's talking about. So I called it a codec.
Right. I think honestly that maybe, you know, there are some terms in English that sounds way cooler when you are foreigner. Yeah. So I think wireless to him sounded like something very futuristic, you know. So, but then to the average, you know, person in America, it's like normal word.
Yeah.
It's not as cool.
Like, yeah, it's more like, you know, it's kind of like what we played with as kids, you know, like a wireless radio, like a almost like a walkie-talkie, or the things that people had in their trucks, you know.
Right, makes sense. And speaking of still, of course, on Metal Gear, the main protagonist is Snake. We can say that there is a lot of you, Snake, because you acted as a sort of bridge between the Japanese Snake and what we got, which is the American translation, which was later used as well in the rest of the world, of the Western world. So, right, a lot of you, but how much of you exactly would you say there is in Snake? Which character would you say was the most fun, had the most fun dialogues to translate?
I had fun with God, I think I had fun with, I would probably put up there Revolver Ocelot. I would put up there what was the shaman,
Vulcan Raven.
The Vulcan Raven, yeah. He was a lot of fun, and Liquid Snake was a lot of fun. But I mean, they all were fun. I mean, I had different voices in my head. And the answer to your question of how much is of course it's impossible. I read Kojima's work and I felt it in my body in a certain way. And I felt that I was receiving it half as a Japanese person and half as an American person. And my job was to try to, you know, feel the Japanese in one ear and then let it come out my American brain. But the biggest thing is that, you know, in the language of cinema or movies or anything like that, we have iconic sort of stereotypes, you might say. And they really don't match up one-to-one. You know, if you grew up as a Japanese person, you're going to be watching anime, and the voice of Otsuka, who played Snake, for example, is so classic. And he's doing a certain kind of archetype. And I felt, well, I have to bring an archetype to this. But what archetype do we have in our culture that this feels like?
Matches.
And you know, and a lot of it is also a combination of what David Hayter, for example, on the first day, he said, I really can't do Otsuka's voice. It's so deep, and that's just not the voice I can do. So this is my recollection, that on the first day, before we begin recording, we have to kind of check, okay, how are you going to do this voice? Let me hear your ideas for this voice. So we went around, and David, you know, tried this or tried that, and what he said he couldn't do a low voice, I said, well, do you have a Clint Eastwood in there? And he grits his teeth and he goes, yeah, I think I can do it like this. You know, yeah, something like this. And I was like, okay, perfect. We'll go with that because, you know, frankly, we didn't really have time. I mean, the clock starts as soon as studio time starts. We're paying studio hours. We got to get to work. And it's like chop, chop, chop in the studio. I wish people understood how quickly you move in the studio. You have to make very fast decisions. You hear a line, yeah, I mean, it's one line after the other, and so you have to kind of hear one line read and imagine how that's going to sound in the game compared to, the last actor that was his dialogue partner, because they're going in there individually. They're not. In Snatcher, we had a whole different thing going. We had many people working at the same time in one large studio, each mic'd up, which is really unusual. Generally, one person goes.
All the voice actors.
Yeah,
that's weird.
That Snatcher was very unusual. Yeah,
and so there was. My understanding is that there was a lot of communication between you and the actors. Were you also voice director in Metal Gear?
No, I wasn't the official voice director. What I was brought on because I was the person that wrote the script. So I was literally sitting next to the voice director. And she gave me a very free hand to talk up on the mic and ask for people to do it this way or that way. And so I'm just a very vocal person. So she works with them all the time. These were actors that she works with all the time. So she tended not to get on them very much about stuff.
Nice. So basically, that's fantastic.
Yeah, so,
because later you did some voice directing. So I thought maybe you were voice director in there as well. You were unofficially the voice director, basically.
I would consider myself a co-director. Since we were both literally giving direction to the actors, and we were the only one giving direction to the actors, the two of us. So, she tended to be more involved in the organization of which scene we were going to do next so we could maintain a very tight schedule. She would say, flip to, page 97 in the script, go to the blue tab. And I'd be the one that said, can you put a little more emphasis on the word that there? Can you make it a little more, 20% more angry, or, take that down a little bit. It kind of worked out that way.
And so once you also directed the actors' performances, you would say that at the end, David Hayter's performance managed to catch what you were going for, because you wrote those lines, but he spoke it. So his voice is what came to us, and that of the other actors as well.
I generally check how good the lines are by either saying them out loud, or in my mind I have the voice speaking, along with the the tempo, the emphasis. So I had a very clear idea of what I wanted each line to sound like. So it was sort of natural for me to request that I got it in that way. I was generally pretty happy with everything.
And honestly, I was pretty happy as well with the job you did. His delivery is now iconic. Everybody's delivery is now like lots of catchphrases in there as well, with the command. It's like, read your mind, and it's still the moment you read it, you have the character in your head speaking with the voice. The game.
I mean, it's a very big combination of the writing, the directing, what an actor brings to it. It's all these different people bringing their own minds to the character, and you get a kind of a melange of all these different things. So,
did you work closely with Kojima? Was it there a lot of distance back and forth? So did you ever get to meet him in person?
I went to Japan and visited Kojima in his office before I began the project, kind of a pre-start to it. And I remember him in his office with the Lego blocks showing me a bit about it. But no, he's very hands-off when it comes to, once he's done with the work of producing the game, at least at the time, I think he probably speaks better English than he did then. He didn't speak any really then. So there wasn't much he felt he could contribute to the localization, I guess, or the English version. So he wasn't involved very directly, although during the recording sessions, there was a couple of days when he phoned in and kind of checked in to see how it's going. And he did have a representative there that tried more or less to to keep tabs on how things. Yeah, he was trying to keep tabs on what was going on, but as I said, it moves very, very fast, and he couldn't keep up with the English. So it was basically it was just Chris Zimmerman, the director, and me, and the actors doing our thing.
Right. And I think that really not everybody realizes the huge part of the localization process is adapting the foreign script to make it sound natural, or as natural as possible to the target audience.
Yeah.
And this involves a huge amount of research. I would say, what was this process like in the case of the MGS1?
Yeah, when I started, I the first thing I translated was the opening demo. And it's almost like once I finished that, I was deeply enough into it that the rest kind of proceeded from there. But it was very difficult because I think I had the opening demo on VHS tape. It was done. That was the only one that I got to work with. And kind of having the Colonel deliver those lines so that they matched with the sort of montage of the opening demo and the sub. It was a little tricky because Japanese tends to be backwards in the word order. So that was a bit tricky. But I realized very quickly I didn't know how military people spoke. I'm kind of a peacenik,
Right.
So I began reading these books by this guy named Marchenko, who wrote these SEAL Team 6 books. Yeah. And I forced myself to read book after book after book by this guy Marchenko, so I could, I don't know, kind of absorb it into my pores. And it's when I realized, the military guys, they tend to speak very economically, So, for example,
in the middle of a battle, you don't really have time for chit chat. You need to be short and effective, I guess.
Well, right. Also, if the Colonel and Snake had been on many missions together, like we're supposed to believe, they would have a kind of a shorthand between each other. And so we have that line. What's that? I can't even remember. What was the? OSP.
OSP.
OSP was just a line in Japanese that says something. It's similarly. It's a noun form turned into a verb. But it's a very ridiculous concept if you think about it, because you're not going to get sent on a military mission with no weapons. But I wanted it to sound matter-of-factly, like the Colonel was saying, "Oh, it's one of these again. It's the OS, and so it's the OSP as usual. Yeah, OSP,
But of course,
like everybody knows what OSP means,
He managed to pass this concept through totally. Me, as a kid, knowing nothing of military, and this was being my first military game in a way, I thought, okay, this must be regular stuff. We totally managed to get the concept through, totally. I was wondering one thing about the Marchenko's book. Does he curse as much as his reputation says in the books?
Yeah, he constantly cursing. Yeah. Every line is there.
Why do I ask? Because there is this game called the Rogue Warrior, in which he curses constantly, literally constantly. Yeah. Instead of sir, he goes like, I won't say it now, but you know what I mean. So I was wondering, did you know about the game Rogue Warrior? Supposedly it's from 2009. Supposedly very, very bad.
I never played it.
But did you hear of it or never even heard it? Well, it's a guilty pleasure. If you want to have a laugh, see a walkthrough because it's really hilarious.
I heard of the game, but yeah.
All the time, it was very, very so bad. It was bad, Not
Unlike some of the games I've done, which are so bad that they're good.
But honestly, the games you worked on, they're all pretty. That's quite a curriculum there. There is an Easter egg in which you. In Metal Gear Solid 1, in which you get the camera, and whenever you take a picture of the environment, a ghost would appear. And it's the ghost of the developers. And among them, there is you. Did you ever manage to take a look at your picture in the
it took many years that I was waiting for it, because I knew it was in there, because I remember when he took a picture of me and they said it would be in there, but when I played the game, I never could find it, and it was only many years later that someone decided to find all of the ghosts, and they posted on Twitter or something, and I was like 20 years later I finally saw my ghost.
It was in a nice place too, because I think it was with them in the snow area where you beat Sniper Wolf.
Yeah,
I think your ghost photo was in there. You had to take a specific tree or something. I could barely tell it was you, honestly. I only knew that because it was written somewhere, because honestly it was very difficult. But at the same time, it was one of the very few, if not the only, Western, guy.
Yeah.
The rest was all Japanese people, of course.
Yeah.
MGS1 was recently re-released in the Master Collection Volume 1. I'm not sure if you're aware, but this means that your localization managed to possibly reach new fans. How does it make you feel that your work has finally been re-released and it's not stuck on PS1 anymore? Well, it was released on PC, but it was still, years ago. Are you happy about it? Is it a nice trip down the reload lane, or maybe you will leave the past behind?
I'm very happy about it. I think that there's all these re-releases now. Silent Hill 2 coming out, and of course I understand why we want to keep it updated with the technology and to reach new fans. But on the other hand, part of me feels like it's like what they call lightning in a bottle. It can only be done once, what you create at that time. And like I said, it's a combination of all these accidents, and those actors were doing it for the first time, so it was very fresh. So I would like it to remain as it was. It's something accessible to people. Make remakes if you want, but it would be a sad thing to see. I mean, imagine if someone, did a remake, rewrote King Lear, and then they just threw away the Shakespeare version because it's updated,
No, not really. I always say this concept specifically in my videos, especially like when I talk about remakes. Oh, your cat is so. About remakes, they never replace the originals. They add to it, to their experience.
Yeah.
Both can coexist, both great, possibly, hopefully, when the remake is also good. But yeah, I totally agree with you. Update doesn't mean that the previous version should be deleted. I'm a big fan of preservation. So for me, that concept of deleting the past is totally nonsense.
Yeah, I agree with you.
So if you think of Kojima games, but also any other Japanese game, you've also worked on games like Silent Hill. Oh my. A big over, so sorry guys. So they are made, these games, by Japanese people, but clearly the settings are mostly American driven, and you can see that this is how Japanese people see America, right?
Exactly.
Especially at the time, Japanese people didn't know English very well, but it's interesting how much they love Hollywood movies so much that it influenced their games in such a big way. So you would think that with settings like this, those games were basically Western ready, but they were really not. Clearly they were not. And that's when you came into place in polishing everything for the Western audience. How did you deal with that? To see how did it make you laugh? Did you cringe? Did it irritate you in some aspect?
Yeah, I did all of those things. I think it's a very interesting thing that you're bringing up, and it's a little bit hard to understand. But in particular, in the case of Metal Gear Solid, I think it's even more interesting. In my mind, what Metal Gear Solid is it's the creation of Kojima, who is an enormous movie fan. And I can imagine him growing up watching these Western movies, these American movies, but he's watching them with the subtitles in Japanese. Now, if you if you read Japanese, if you speak Japanese, and you see the subtitles of the movies that you know, you'd be very, very surprised at the subtitles. For example, there's rules about how long the translation can be, because when you only have a second to read them, for example. So there's kind of tight rules about how much a person can take in 1 second. And particularly in the old days, this Toda Natsuko, who was the most famous movie translator, I always thought she was terrible, absolutely terrible. Because she took liberties that, people complain about translators taking liberties. If you read the Japanese subtitles of movies, you wouldn't believe it. And so anyway, I'm imagining Kojima-san watching all these movies, growing up, same age as me around, but he's reading them in Japanese. And so he's absorbing both the visuals of the American movie, but he's not really getting the Americanness of it. He's getting the it's Japanese.
It's Japanified.
It's Japanified. And then, of course, when he tries to reproduce it, in a sense, making his own Western movie, which I think he was doing. I think that, he was, it was like a love letter. Maybe all of his games are a love letter to the films that he loved, or I mean, look at all of his games. But my point is that he was giving back to the world a Japanized version of what the West had given to him. So we've got this very odd situation where a genre that had been created in the West was absorbed by a Japanese person, a very creative person, spit back, but it's a bit twisted in this Japanese way. So then, as a translator, what is my job? Not only what is my job, so in other words, is my job to make it purely Western, removing the Japanese things? How do you even retain the Japanese things? So there's that fundamental question, right? How do you even keep it? You can't, basically. Yeah, a lot of interesting, sort of philosophical problems come up with that. What else did I want to say about that? So yeah, I mean, I was trying to bridge this gap between, I was essentially trying to understand the author's intent, but his intent for a Japanese audience couldn't possibly be the same as for a Western audience.
Let's not forget that love can blossom in the battlefield.
Yeah, bloom. Yeah, I remember what I wanted to say. If you live in Japan and you watch movies and stuff here, you probably would come to the conclusion that, they're a bit behind in terms of particularly war movies. Cliches tend to be, I would say Japan's a bit behind. If you see in the 80s and 90s and 2000s, Americans become more and more sarcastic or more ironic, you'd find that Japan is a bit mired in the 50s and 60s. So there's this gap between these things. So a line like "Can love bloom on a battlefield?" to me, it's difficult to make that work when you're trying to work in a modern, it felt very old and kind of overly cliched. So that was one of the lines that I really didn't like and wanted to remove, but...
It's clear that Kojima was going for a romantic feel, but there is time and, place for that, I guess. That's how I saw it.
I personally tend to not like writing lines that don't sound like they could be spoken by a human being. So
and
I can't imagine...
Because probably they might say it all the time. Oh, love.
I don't think.
You might know if that's the case or not, because you live in Japan for a long time now, I guess.
Now, it's more a question of whether or not something sounds just too, what's the word? I'm thinking of what's the word in English. Japanese, that's kusai, but So I mean smelly.
Ah.
You know, just overly, what's the word? Schmaltzy, that's Yiddish. Schmaltzy, like overly saccharine, overly sugary.
Yeah,
you know, like,
I get it.
Like Snake is a battle-hardened, veteran, and I just wanted to keep his voice sounded like a battle-hardened veteran, a guy who chuffs down cigarettes and shoots people,
Almost out of character in a way.
Yeah, Clint Eastwood. So, Love Blooming on a Battlefield didn't really fit with my image of Snake. So,
right.
I'd like to say one thing because I realize how that sounds. When I say that it doesn't match with my image, I'm not trying to change Kojima's words. What I'm trying to do is interpret how Kojima would speak if he was with the same understanding of me as me about American culture.
Yeah.
And if somehow we could share brains and I could bring him up to full understanding of, where Americans are, or in terms of their sophistication for how characters should sound, I always felt he would agree with me. It's just that, we didn't work together. We didn't talk about it. But I always felt that I was being true to the spirit of what he wanted. So it's like, I just don't want anyone to really walk away with the idea that I was trying to walk over his words. It was just, I was actually trying to be more faithful to what I felt was his essence, if that makes any sense.
At the end of the day, nobody can read minds, aside from Psychomantic,
Right.
of course. But of course, if you tried to catch what he was going through,
Yeah.
I guess it's as simple as that.
Yeah.
And the translation is always sort of lost. We try to lose as little as possible. That's I guess what we go for at the end of the day.
Yeah. I guess it comes down to the question of, is a translator a part of the production process?
It definitely is. It most definitely is, in my opinion.
In my opinion, definitely is. But I don't.
And that again, there is so much of you in Snake from Metal Gear that than anybody would think.
Listen, when Snake says to Naomi, who's lecturing him about smoking, he says, "Yeah, but you don't know how good a cigarette tastes in the morning."
That's you.
That's me.
So you see, there is a lot of you in Snake, and that part also reverbers in how people today who played the original Metal Gear see Snake. Because of maybe a person that started with Metal Gear 2, in which you didn't have any involvement, Metal Gear Solid 2, I mean, because there is a Metal Gear 2, don't have the same idea of Snake as the people who started from Metal Gear Solid 1. So there is a huge responsibility you have there, a huge part of you that contributed to the legend of Solid Snake, in my opinion.
That in my whole career, I'm probably the most proud of the fact that, I mean, this was Metal Gear Solid 1, and it really wasn't predestined to be the giant thing that it is. I think we did such a good job on it and set it up for success,
Right. But speaking of American settings, Silent Hill, you've worked on Silent Hill 2, 3, 4, and Book of Memories, which are the most fan favorite Silent Hill ever. And you were also, aside from localizer, voice director. And you were also more directly involved with series. Like Team Silent asked you what you think would be appropriate for the American audience and whatnot. How did those meetings go, and how was it? What was it like to be involved so closely in the series?
So working with them was absolutely great. As far as the meetings, it's my recollection that I went to Japan once or twice before the translation started. And we had the first meeting. I recall them just throwing ideas around. But what they were really trying to do was use me as an American to gauge really how far they could go. They wanted to push the envelope. And they were thinking about the Western audience. So they just used me as a sounding board, really, and they were concerned.
That's a very humble approach, to be able to ask for somebody who's the target audience in a way, who's part of the target audience, So that says a lot about the team, I would say.
I think so. Yeah, I think so.
Nice. And which one of your own ideas came to be in those games? Maybe something that is not widely known, but it was your own idea that ended up in the games, if there is any of your input.
I don't think there were many other than I tended to choose the names of the characters. But other than that...
So James Sunderland is yours? The name James Sunderland. That's fantastic. It's classic.
Sunderland happens to be a town in Massachusetts. But the derivation of the name is to sunder, is to separate, right?
Right. Makes sense, yeah.
Was a character from Silent Hill too. Eddie.
Yeah.
There was a person in my daughter's class who had been mean to her, so that was kind of my revenge.
Oh, nice. Very dangerous to mess with you. Good. I didn't know that, by the way. That's awesome.
I never played to that.
Great. And so, did you have any input in the lyrics of the songs by Akira Yamaoka that appear in those games?
I remember he asked me to write lyrics to the theme of Laura.
Huh.
And, not translate them, but to write them and try to come up with things. But I think he didn't, it wasn't his cup of tea, so he went in a different direction.
Okay. But he was open at the idea, of asking somebody else. So in the end, you didn't write a single word for the lyrics at the end. But it says a lot about the people working in there. They were really open, it seems, right?
Yeah, very much.
Good to know. And you were also voice director in those games as well. And everyone who played these games knows that the dialogues have a very unsettling pace, and this hugely contributed to the otherworldly atmosphere. Was it your idea from the beginning? Was it even intended maybe as a direct continuation of the style of the first game?
Well, it wasn't intended. The only way in which I might say it was intended is that the voice actor of James had a kind of a limited ability to switch it up. Let's just say that he pretty much could only deliver the lines the way he could deliver them, and
no margin of maneuverability, basically.
Yeah, no margin of maneuverability, and he didn't have a very natural way of talking in general. And so I think what people are hearing is, Guy Seehee trying his best to deliver the lines the way I wanted them, but filtered through his own acting abilities. So it was not intended. And the other thing I think was that the interval between, when I speak in a conversation, if I say, "Hey, how you doing, Lucian?" You're going to respond in a certain kind of tempo after a certain interval. But I always believed that it was the way in which the dialect kind of loaded up that, or rather, after we did the recording, the team had to put it together. And not being natural English speakers, there might be something to do with the way that they edited, or something to do with the way the timing that it threw off the tempo a little bit, so that it sounded a bit unnatural in some cases. I remember that as my first impression hearing it. Like, oh man, I wish they had involved me in the post-production so I could have made it flow a little bit better.
But this is one of those happy accidents in which the unnatural element of what you said, of the editing, of the vocal performance, literally took it to the next level.
They weren't real professional actors, so to speak. They had various levels of experience, but nobody was like Hollywood pro.
And how did they manage to get involved in the recordings then?
The team wanted to attend the recording sessions, so they asked that we do it in Japan. But especially at that time, there was really a very, very shallow pool of actors and voice actors. They were primarily people that were doing either commercials or occasionally doing English language, learning tapes or, things like that. So we were just working with a very limited number of people. And that's why it doesn't have this, like, if you hear like an actor like Troy Baker, he's so professional that it doesn't even sound like a real person anymore.
Right.
It sounds like an actor. So I think Silent Hill 2, it feels more real, like they're more real people in some cases. Their voice is not perfect.
But at the same time, this makes me think it could have been so much more wrong, because if you think about it, Resident Evil, the first one, is in the same situation. There was a very small pool of English-speaking actors from Japan, and that went in a way that it was unintentionally hilarious. This didn't happen in Silent Hill. Also, Silent Hill 1. I was wondering one thing. Were there ever any recordings which did not end up in the games, as far as you're aware?
Well, we certainly took a lot of extra things that they wound up not using.
Anything meaningful?
No, nothing like that. Just things like, Mr. Yamaoka might say, okay, I think I might want a lot of different voices talking in the background. So, he would come in on the last day and say, all right, guy, can you just pretend like you're talking to someone but mumble? And Yamaoka would take it and do stuff with it. We didn't leave anything on the floor.
But there is this joke ending in Silent Hill 2, the one with the dog. I don't want to do spoilers for the few people who are watching this video that didn't play the original. But if you recall, I'm not sure if you even saw it, but that sequence didn't have English dub. So do you have any... It was only Japanese. So do you have any idea why was that done this way? And was there ever going to be an English dub for the sequences, but maybe didn't have time, or maybe it was added later?
If you're talking about Guy Fifi's, I remember he said something in Japanese in that ending. But I think I wasn't there that day. I think that was one of those cases where, maybe Mr. Yamaoka or someone else said, okay, say this in Japanese. And it was just like something that he...
Maybe last minute as well.
Yeah, it was a last minute throwaway thing. We'll throw this into the game. Not very serious, so I don't even think I was there.
Okay. How about the Silent Hill remake, Silent Hill 2 remake? Did you manage to take a look at the trailer? So what do you think of it? Because of course they won't use your work. What do you think of it?
There was the HD remake, right?
We don't talk about that. But we do, of course.
I was pretty critical of it. When I saw the trailer for the new one, my first impression was quite surprised, because at first I wasn't sure if it was new recording or not, because the actors were clearly, really, really very clearly in my mind, copying the read of the original. So in other words, if I said to you, okay, Lucian, listen to this line, listen to how she says it, and give it back to me like that, but in your own voice, or, but try to keep the same beats, try to keep the same tempo, try to, accentuate the same things. That's what I heard in the Silent Hill 2 remake. It sounded to me really clearly that they were referring to the original and wanting to get the same line reads. So
you can tell that Bluebird team is like extremely cautious with they know what they are messing with. So they tried their best, and there were their fair share of controversies, but especially honestly, my opinion is that the first trailers lean too much towards the action, when Silent Hill is anything but about the action, So I think it was just the marketing team just doing the wrong thing at the wrong time. But the best part, at least, is that apparently this misunderstanding was cleared, and the game knows what it's about. At least it seems. But for sure, one that I'm with you about the criticism was the HD remake that was released on PS3 and Xbox 360. But Silent Hill 2 got lucky still, in a way, with the voice acting, because there was at least the selection between the old voice acting and the new one. The less said about the new one, the better. But the third game caused an uproar by the fans. So the fans were really like, why did you remove the original voiceover? And fans care so much about the original work to the point of actually bashing the game for it, because that's the case. Fans were like, give us don't mess with things that work, that are classic for us, or at least give the option. Silent Hill 3 is iconic with his voice acting as well, as much as 2, in my opinion. So not to give the option.
I thought the acting on Silent Hill 3 was better than 2 for sure.
Yeah. And speaking of Silent Hill 4, there was this rumor that Silent Hill 4 was not conceived as part of the Silent Hill series, at least in the beginning. And what's your input there?
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure. I mean, I think I read that some of the people from Team Silent said, yeah, it was always going to be a Silent Hill game, but that they intended it to be very different. I mean, I remember what they did was they essentially did 3 and 4 at the same time. They split the team in half. And
Silent Hill 4 was pretty controversial at the beginning, but I think it's being revisited and re-evaluated more recently. I've always loved it. It was, I found it, if you can believe it, scarier than 3, if you can believe it, because the monsters really got under my skin, honestly. But that is my take on that. But I would like to know your project out of the 3, your favorite project out of the 3. Which one gave you the fondest memories? Got you there.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, it was either 2 or 3 for sure.
Why, did something go wrong with 4, or was it simply...
No, nothing went wrong with it, but part of the recording was done in New York. And some of the actors were Pokemon actors, if I recall, yeah.
I didn't realize that. In general, are you a horror fan of movies or...
Yeah, I'm a very big, all the same influences that Team Silent had, David Lynch and, what's his name, the master of body horror.
The one from Alien, or is it Tom Savini, the special effect artist? I can't really... But did you play any of these games after they were completed, the Silent Hill games? Did you manage to finish them?
I think I finished, I don't think I finished 4, but I definitely finished 2 and 3. They're not exactly fun to play in the same, it's not like playing Animal Crossing.
Right.
It's pretty dark.
It is tough in some cases. But I'd say let's go back to the Kojima-verse a little bit. Because you mentioned the Snatcher previously, and I would like to talk about that, because that's one of my, all-time favorite titles. And same as Silent Hill, you didn't simply take care of the translation and localization, but you were also further than that, and you took care of establishing which actor would take which role, and also the tone, I believe. So
I was working at Konami at the time, International Business Department. So I was doing things like shipping and stuff like that, but I was the only foreigner in the whole company. And so R&D began to ask me more and more and more to do little things. At the time, these were 16-bit games, so I think the first game I was translating like things like Animaniacs and Tiny Toons and Biker Mice from Mars, and writing the scripts for them too. So before I was translating, I was doing things like that. When Snatcher came around, this was the first game that they were going to put on a CD. So all of a sudden, all this voice, all this text. Obviously, I wasn't going to translate it. I was working 10 hours a day at Konami in the business department. So we found a translator who did an unbelievable job. And I sort of oversaw it, but there really wasn't much to change. The only thing I did in the text was there was a lot of there were some additional things they put in. So I did that. Played with the translation a little bit, just a bit. And then when it came time for the voice recording, we went to Chicago and I directed it there in Chicago. So I would say I was a localization director and the voice director. As far as finding the actors, I didn't find the actors. Interestingly, my twin brother, Michael, was working at Konami in Chicago while I was working at Konami in Tokyo.
What were the chances?
They found the studio, the Chicago, Konami US found the studio, and the studio had actors that they worked with, and they picked a bunch of them. And I think the studio director basically decided who was going to do what voice. But just like Metal Gear Solid, you're only deciding who's going to do what, but you haven't decided the voices yet. So I got in there. All right, how are you going to do Metal Gear, for example? I said to the voice actress, and she did all the robot voices. Oh, that's good. All right, how are you going to do Gillian Seed? Okay, and again, lucky accidents. We got to Chicago, and it was a very unique setup. This guy had a big studio, and unlike most games where you have a recording booth, which one guy goes into at a time, we had like 4 or 5 actors standing, mic'd up in the same space.
Again, that's the best way.
I think it was their first video game, and these were people that were used to doing, rather limited things, not acting, but,
Nice. I loved the job you did in there. Their job, the actors' performances. It's such a high quality, especially for the time, because this is we're talking about 1993, 94 maybe. And I've always wondered, with such a huge work in the localization voice recording in English for once, with the work already done, why was this never brought over to the much wider player base of the PlayStation? I mean, there was a port, but it was only released in Japan. Do you have an idea why? Because I know the Sega CD selling numbers were abysmal, but the PS1 was the dominating console in the second half of the 90s. So one would think it would have been a safe bet for Konami.
I would have to speculate. It's either the fact that it didn't sell, and if I was speculating, I might say that it may be a little bit embarrassing for Mr. Kojima because, it was a really early work, and it was basically he took Terminator and
Blade Runner
and mashed them up.
And that's what he did as well with Policenauts.
I don't know. Maybe there's copyright issues that would be a concern. Maybe.
That makes sense. I didn't think about it.
Yeah.
Right. And speaking of Policenauts, honestly, I would have loved the localization done by you. We still got the excellent fan translation by the awesome people at Junker HQ, but I was wondering, were you ever considered for this project by Konami, and would you ever have accepted if they offered you to localize this game?
The conversation about whether or not to localize it, I remember happening while I was at Konami. And I specifically remember my Bucho, my boss in the department, they came to the decision not to do it, and I think at that time it was a financial decision.
They won't take the risk.
Yeah, plus it's incredibly expensive.
Yes.
You have to understand, recording that amount of dialogue is really expensive and a lot of work.
Yeah, but at the same time, they did all the work for the small Sega CD version, which is for an add-on, not just a console, a whole console. You needed to buy an add-on and have the base console, but not do that for the PS1, which was a standalone product.
Yeah, but Policenauts is a little bit more risque.
Usually. Yeah, but it was very similar in a way from the gameplay, the little gameplay that there is to Snatcher. In a way, they are kind of. I always see them as twins or relative projects. And how would you feel if Konami released the English version of Snatcher today, or maybe even finally released Policenauts to the world with the localization done by you? Would you be okay with it? Would you accept today if Konami...
Yeah, I would say take my money.
Because as well, you do the localization for Policenauts. Would you accept it if it was today?
Oh, yeah.
If somebody from Konami is looking at this video, please. Especially, it's not that far-fetched, or rather, maybe. But because Konami recently has been looking at their back catalog, so who knows? They're still releasing Kojima games even after his departure, so who knows?
I mean, listen, I think they should release Snatcher immediately. Just put it up on the PlayStation Store.
It's money on the table.
For that matter, I don't understand why any games aren't just released. I mean...
Right, I agree.
Can you play Vandal Hearts?
I only the second I played. I would have loved to play it now, but it's so expensive. Honestly, I can't.
The funny thing that a lot of the games I translated turned out to be kind of cult classics that are expensive.
Right. For example, Castlevania. Castlevania is one of those as well, crazy expensive today. And speaking of that, you localized the Immortal Symphony of the Night, of course, so the first question is really an obvious one. What is a man?
It's a miserable little pile of secret.
That's exactly what it is. How did you came up with that?
I was translating the opening scene, and I was looking at it at the same time. And when it got to the, if you could imagine in your mind's eye, Dracula standing up and hurling the glass would wind down, and he said something. Now, the Japanese that he said, it just didn't click in any way with a line that I felt I could make work in English. He says something like, we shall be the judge, we'll judge that by who lives and who dies, or some kind of line like that, The truth of the matter will be judged, but it's just, I couldn't, and bear in mind, if I thought about it for probably 15 minutes or half an hour, I probably couldn't come up with something which was closer to the original. However, nobody at the time thought that it was important, really, to make sure it was the same as the original. Our only goal was to create a game that would be fun to play, because we had no expectation that somebody in Europe was going to be looking at the Japanese lines and picking through it and saying,
Got you there.
Yeah, it's not the same as what he wrote. It was just,
It's not the same, so hence is wrong. That's not how it works.
Lucian, these days, I dare say that I wouldn't have the courage to come up with my own line, because I would be, crucified.
And we would have lost a big line in there, because we would have lost a big moment in Castlevania history.
Yeah, so I got to this line that seemed very dramatic. It seemed like it should be a line that sounded, this is Dracula, he's like thousands of years old. And it really shouldn't be speaking kind of everyday language. I wanted it to sound very special. So I decided what I would do is go through a book of Proverbs. And I had a little book about this big of Proverbs. And I think you could index by like subject. And I might have looked up like humanity or something like that.
Is it the same book from which you took the one of the phrases from the endings, that the only way for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing?
Wait, did I put that line?
Yeah, you did. And ever since I was a child, I thought, man, that's so good. It's so true as well.
That particular line is something that is well known in the West.
It stayed with me, that line, forever. Like ever since, I never forgot that line. So it's great that you chose. And moreover, I think that Dracula's line, what is a man, like the way it was also delivered, and we will go there as well. He was so angry. It makes sense that he was angry, because he was sealed away for 100 years and he just came back and is already going back. So, I don't want to go back. What is a man?
I think it was contemptuous.
Yes.
Contemptuous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was great.
Yeah. I had no regrets about that.
And again, speaking of the English voice performance, it was very, very theatrical. But the script...
I was not involved in the audio recording in any way.
Okay, so you didn't choose the person, you didn't cast anybody.
I had not.
Okay, so you were not voice director in Castlevania. Okay, so you didn't have any input on, because you wrote the dialogues, but they spoke it, the voice actors spoke it. You, unlike Metal Gear Solid, they just gave your script to the voice actors, and they had, it's a miracle that it got this good, honestly, without your involvement of the original, script writer. Honestly, there were some, of course, hiccups, because, what do you hear? Do you remember that?
Yeah, I thank you. That's it. That's probably the line that I would bring up to show that they didn't. I would try to write archaic English, somewhat archaic, And what do you hear is actually, I don't know maybe it was like a Thor comic where I first heard that. I mean, most of that kind of writing. I mean, I read comics all the time as a kid, and they were well written back then in the 60s and 70s. So I think I
were influenced.
I was definitely channeling like Thor comics there. But clearly the voice actor didn't know that grammatical thing. So
to me, that is as iconic as the rest. Honestly, and for me, I took it as an archaic English. Honestly, so for me, as a kid who didn't speak English really, was just starting speaking English, reading English, barely even reading English, it came through as something archaic, which made sense because let's face it, it was in 17 something 89, so it makes sense that it was archaic. It was totally in character with the setting and the time.
The other thing that you might not have noticed about the translation of that game is I really played with the items a lot. I took things from Tolkien, I took things from Kurt Vonnegut, I took things from everywhere that I could think of for these item names, because a lot of times I didn't know what they were referring to in Japanese, And it wasn't like, back then it wasn't like you could just send an email or, you were working by yourself. And so, and again, like I said, I didn't think it mattered if it was, as long as it was fantastical,
Right. But gamers as well, they didn't have the ways to check as much as they can now. Counter check.
Yeah, the internet also wasn't what it is now.
Totally.
In fact, I don't even know if there was an internet.
1997, it was very, very rough. There was the 56K modem that did the horrible sound, which is now burnt into my earbuds. But good old times. Good old times. And speaking of the script, again, like many others, your script was redone in subsequent re-release of Castlevania Symphony of the Night, starting with Dracula X Chronicles, but also the most recent Requiem. And honestly, I've read many comments and people were like, I would have loved so much the original script because for the voice delivery as well. How does it make you feel again that fans point at your work as the definitive version of the game?
Let's not fool ourselves. In some cases, it's just nostalgia of youth. So I'm not going to stand here and say that whether it's Silent Hill 2 or Castlevania, I'm not going to say that they were the end-all, be-all great voice acting. But they were the original thing, and it was lightning in a bottle, and I can understand why people would want to hear what they played in their youth. So, and of course, I'm happy about it, and I'm very sad that What Is the Man is now gone.
But that's another thing. It's way less theatrical, like in a play. I've always saw it as if it was like in a theater, really, as if the characters were kind of playing the roles in a way, and it was awesome.
If it's not an improvement, I don't see why you would page it back. I mean, I don't know. My personal opinion is that the American game is the American game, and the Japanese game is the Japanese game. And if you're going to remake the American game, I'm not sure why you would go back to the script and say, oh, this is, a mistake. I mean, if it's a mistake, okay, but is What Is the Man a mistake?
Right. And speaking of hardships, I would say that one of the most maybe difficult things to, projects to translate games are RPGs. And you worked on the localization of some of the most cult classic JRPGs, including Suikoden 2, Vandal Hearts, Dragon Quest 7, Valkyrie Profile, Shadow Hearts. So you are an authority in this. But are you an RPG guy yourself?
Yeah, I used to be. Japanese RPGs, like, you have to have a lot of free time.
At least 50 hours for the main quest.
Yeah. So, yeah, I used to play a lot of RPGs.
So, yeah. But it's safe to say that you really pioneered, in a way, the concept of localization in video games, with emphasis on quality, along with very few others, like maybe Working Designs come to mind. But your portfolio, your RPG portfolio makes you among the biggest authorities, I would say, in RPG localization. So how is it different to localize an RPG with a huge world building and tons of characters compared to something smaller like platformers like Castlevania or Escape with way less line of dialogues?
Well, first thing I would say is that, like Metal Gear Solid and Silent Hill 2, I translated 100% by myself. But an RPG like Suikoden was a completely different story. Not to mention Dragon Quest 7, which was 10 times more horrible. The first thing you have to understand is that back then they didn't have the tools that they have now. We didn't have computer-assisted translation tools. We didn't have even the team themselves. Basically, what they would do back then is the Japanese team would make the game, and when they were done, after working for 2 years, sleeping on couches, they were done. They would just hand it off to someone. You wouldn't talk to them. There was no one in between the team and the translator. There just wasn't anyone, and so there was no one to talk to.
They were probably burnt out as well. They didn't want to hear anything about the game anymore.
They didn't want to be bothered. So in the case of both Suikoden and Dragon Quest, just to show you how ridiculous it was, Suikoden, we got, you get like hundreds or thousands of files, okay? In the case of Suikoden, we didn't even know which character was speaking. Imagine, because I suppose the character names were compiled back into it. You got this text with code, with code in it that you have to work around. And it would say something like X4976, and then it would have a line. So we didn't know what character was speaking, and in Suikoden, you've got 108 characters.
You had to guess.
We had to play the game and make educated guesses. We didn't even know, you wouldn't know, Japanese doesn't contain plural forms, for example, so you wouldn't know if you're fighting a single monster or a group of monsters, for example.
Right.
You wouldn't know if a character is a boy or a girl.
So there's a lot of room for mistakes that wouldn't depend on you.
I didn't translate those by myself. I put together a team of 3 or 4 people. In the case of Dragon Quest 7, at one point we had over 20 people working on it.
Oh my God.
And there was tens of thousands of files. In fact, this isn't something I've talked about in an interview before, but I had a friend who was a programmer, and I said to him, how am I going to deal with the size of this thing? And he said, if it was me, this guy who knows nothing about translation. He says, I could just, write a program to sort of suck up all the text and take out the code and we'll spit it back and blah, 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 blah. So we began this project together to do this. And I started a company, WordBox, which was the name of the software that this guy was building. It was like the first computer-assisted translation tool. So it included, you could put in glossary terms, and eventually even the translators could chat with each other in real time.
Not bad.
It was quite amazing, really. It was amazing what this guy did. There was no other way to handle that. We're talking about tens of thousands of files and just absolute chaos.
Oh my God. But that paid off.
Yeah, I mean, they retranslated Dragon Quest 7.
Yeah, for 3DS.
And they had every advantage talking to the teams, tools, technology. So yeah, there's a lot of regrets.
But among the highest, honestly, in my opinion, works in RPG, Valkyrie Profile for me takes the cake.
That one, geez. Yeah, that one was a pretty tightly run ship, and I don't recall any problems of understanding or knowing. I mean, I'm a huge Norse mythology fan, so.
So that was really up your alley.
Yeah, not only that, I also worked with my sister, the voice actress from Pokemon, on that one. So that was a great pleasure.
Nice. And of course, to my side, my noble Einherjar. How epic was that? Was that a line you translated yourself, by the way? Do we owe it to you? Oh, that's got pretty amazing job.
I always took the best stuff, the best lines for myself.
That was great. You didn't have anything to do with the voice recordings in this one.
Yeah, I did. I capped and directed it.
So that explains it. that line.
It was all done in Taj Studios in New York, where the original Pokemon was done.
Oh, okay. So
Yeah, those were all Pokemon actors.
right. And but honestly, I have to tell you, with how many times you hear that line in battles, basically whenever a battle begins, to my side, Winnable and Harrier, it's amazing that it didn't come to bother after the 1000th time. It will always put you in the mood of battle, like bring it on, like, you know. That was really an amazing job. In fact, I believe that your voice directing job, voice performances were not re-recorded, were not replaced to this day, because Valkyrie Profile was recently re-released on PS4, but it was on PS4 and 5, but it was based on the PSP, which I believe that it's the same performance.
I don't know.
As the one that it's the same as the PS1. So
where could you play that now?
on PS4 you can. There is a digital version, and there is it's based on the PSP version, which was the first widescreen version. But you know, with the single rooms that was squared 4x3, they had to stretch it. I'm not sure I don't own the PS4. I only own the PSP version, which was the first one to come into Europe, and it's the same voice acting as the original.
I love that game.
Speaking of that game, from even personally involved, because I want to thank you so much for giving my name, Lucian, to one of the main characters. The original name, if I'm not mistaken, was like Ruscio or Lucio. But you went with Lucian, and was there a particular reason? But more in general, what makes you decide to change something from the original to Japanese when it comes to names?
Yeah, I knew. I think a friend of the family had a son named Lucian.
I have to thank him.
But also Lilith, you know, like, in Japanese it was probably Birisu.
Okay.
I didn't know what that was, what that was referring to, or what they were imagining Birisu was, you know.
Do they know that Lucian is based, the person, does he know that Lucian, the character, you named after him? No. You never told him. Good. And speaking of Vandal Hearts, as you said, it was one of the earliest work for you, and one of the earliest RPG for the Western market, possibly the first big one, I would say.
It wasn't actually the first. The first one that I actually translated and directed would have been Hardcore, Contra Hardcore.
Okay. No, but as an RPG, that was the first one, I believe.
Yeah.
Okay. And what I'd like to know is how hard it was being the first RPG that you did with tons of lines compared to the later RPGs. Was it like a tough wall to break?
I didn't really think of that as an RPG. I think now they would call it an SRPG.
Strategy, of course, yeah.
Yeah, so it didn't have that many characters. It was, much easier to...
It was smaller in scales.
But you still came from Snatcher, which I believe had more dialogues than Vandal Hearts, even considering the genre.
Yeah, Vandal Hearts I did by myself.
So it was small enough for you to do it all by yourself. Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. And but Suikoden 2 was a much bigger project, right?
Suikoden was much bigger.
The biggest was Dragon Quest, you said?
10 times bigger than...
My God. I didn't finish Dragon Quest, but Suikoden 2, it was incredible. But that had its own share of controversies, right?
Yeah, I think that was I think it was like the first game where someone said shit.
And how did it feel back in the day? Did they manage to get under your skin this feedback? It wasn't always constructive, you would say, or was it? Because there was controversy surrounding the translation of Suikoden 2.
Yeah, Suikoden 2. No, it never really got under my skin because I knew nobody knew the challenges we were facing. Like I said, we had a text dump. We didn't know what characters were speaking. We had a terrible deadline. And it was actually an amazing thing that we pulled it off at all.
I agree.
Some of the better lines in there, because it's a lot of up and down in it. I know there was some really, really good writing and good translation, but there was probably a lot of mistakes.
Suikoden 2 wasn't just by yourself.
No, that was with a few people.
Right.
And I remember, I translated some scenes that were a lot of fun, like Luca Blight, like the whole die picks,
Oh my god, that really got me. That scene.
Yeah.
That was fun.
It was fun. It made me feel like such strong feelings.
I think Luca Blight, who could have been Ruka Bright.
Right.
I mean,
but Blight is so perfect.
I think the Japanese creators were probably thinking of the word bright. They wouldn't know the word blight, but it occurred to me blight would be a better.
Makes so much more sense for his personality. And speaking of controversies, because we know we love those, but you've handled the voice work also for the first Shenmue on Dreamcast, right?
I didn't have much to do with that.
Okay.
Shenmue was this enormous project, and I remember when Yu Suzuki, he just threw so much money at it, and there was this one initial meeting at his place. I'll never forget it. A giant round table with a TV that came up from the middle of it like a James Bond movie. Everybody around that table, this is before any of it started, it was like you could smell the money in this thing. But he also wanted to do it in Japan, like Team Silent did. Problem was this, they told us from the beginning it was going to have 500 characters or 500, spoken voices. And I knew it was impossible because there simply weren't that many, not even close to that many voice actors.
Maybe not even people, normal people.
Not even foreigners. So what my company did for that was we helped with the casting, okay, which is to say we contacted agencies to send people. That was one thing we did. The other thing that I did, sort of separately, was help to cast the two main roles, the lead male and the lead female. And for that, according to Mr. Suzuki, he wanted them cast in America and he wanted them to be attractive young people because he had plans for, maybe doing a series or live action thing. He wanted them to look the part. He wanted the male to be a martial arts guy.
And attractive.
And attractive. So I went to New York and I did a casting call there, and I had people were sending me their 4x6s, and so I found the two lead characters, but I didn't have anything to do with translation or voice recording.
Okay,
that was it.
So, and do you have any idea then why are they so bad? The quality.
I'll tell you. First of all, it was a foregone conclusion that it was going to be a disaster, and I knew it was going to be a disaster. And that's why I didn't get involved, because there was no way it was going to be good. For one thing, we didn't translate it because, as I recall, Mr. Suzuki, I heard that he had a brother-in-law that had a translation company or something.
Okay, so he wanted to leave that to him, the translation. No, but the sound quality feels horrible. Was it like the booth, falling apart? Because it's so weird that there is noises in the background.
It was so rushed that it was such a pressured operation that it was like watching a slow motion train wreck. And I knew it wasn't going to be good.
Right. It's a miracle it even came out as good as it is.
It's pretty bad though, wasn't it?
More than the vocal deliveries, it was the sound quality that felt strangely bad, as if it wasn't even checked, There was nobody checking there. It was not soundproof or something like that, or not well enough, And it felt even more evident because the PlayStation 4 and Xbox version has Shenmue 1 and 2, and you could choose between the Japanese and the American voice acting. And when you put the Japanese version, it felt very clear. The sound was clear, there was no background noise. But if you put the English version, it was night and day in terms of sound quality. Because the voice acting, we could accept what it was for the vocal performances, but the sound quality felt like, normally, even if the voice acting is kind of bad, the sound quality can be checked, looked after, but in that case, it didn't feel like it, and it was weird considering that it was the most expensive game ever at the time, It felt like, where the money going?
Yeah. He's very big, very rushed,
Very poorly planned.
Poorly managed, maybe.
poorly conceived. I mean, it never should have been recorded in Japan.
Yeah.
Should have happened.
Right, I agree. And then, but let's change game a little bit, because one of my favorites that you worked on, as if there was only one, is Shadow Hearts for PS2. And that translation was, again, a little bit controversial. And that really goes to say, really, you can't please everybody, we know that.
Do you mean the first Shadow?
The first one.
The budget difference between the first Shadow Hearts and Shadow Hearts Covenant was quite huge. Not only was the budget different, but the companies that were hiring us to do it were different. Shadow Hearts, it had a bit of a strange, it went to Midway, but it was first started by a company called Aruze.
Okay.
And then Aruze, gave it to someone else. And so, I think, was it Activision? I can't even recall, but Covenant, by the time we got to Covenant, we were hiring, real pros and doing it in a place in LA. Shadow Hearts, we kind of slapped it together, low budget, and I have some regrets about that.
You did the best you could with what you were.
Yeah,
You had available.
I did my best.
One of the things is like the protagonist, Yuri. He was basically a pervy throughout the game. The female lead was like 14, and he was like harassing her all the time. And how did it make you feel to translate his lines? So were you like, oh my god, is this guy for real? Or you simply maybe didn't care? Or
I guess I must have forgotten that.
The name was also different. You or maybe somebody from your team changed the name from the Japanese. If it wasn't Yuri, it was something else that I can't recall.
I can.
You did.
I changed to Yuri, and I'm still in contact with Mr. Machida.
Oh, really?
And he loved that change.
I love it. I thought that the original. I don't even remember. It was much more complicated.
It was Urmanov.
It's so hard. Like
It was Udo.
Udo. Okay.
Which didn't make any sense. Half Japanese, half Russian, and I just thought Udo doesn't sound like a name to the Western audience. So what would sound like a name they know? So
the Yuri is totally Russian, honestly. No, that's a great choice. And my God, I will speak about RPGs all the time, but we need to move on because I would like you to tell us a little bit about Pokemon. Because you translated and localized multiple Pokemon anime seasons, not video games, anime seasons, and some of the early movies as well. So, were you already a fan of the franchise? Are you now? Did you get to name somebody differently in the anime, either a Pokemon or a human character? How much of you is in there?
Not much. I'll tell you why. In order to do the automatic dialogue replacement to match the lip flap of characters, you really need to make changes when you're in the booth, and you have to say a line that matches it. When I'm translating it, I can't be that precise because I'm not seeing the video. And when an actor goes into the booth, they're watching the video up on a screen, and it's called ADR, and they become very, very good at it.
Right.
But in order to do that, they have to have some flexibility to change it when they're in the booth.
Right.
So the process that we got to do with Pokemon was that I would just translate the meaning, translate it rather directly.
Okay.
And it was usually a guy named Carter Cathcart, who was one of the actors. He would rework it. He would, rework it somewhat, and then in the booth they would rework it even more. to make it match. So the end result, I never know how much of what I wrote wound up in, I never watched. I was translating a lot of Pokemon, and yeah, I mean, I liked Pokemon enough, but I wasn't
Obsessed with it.
yeah.
Okay.
I
But
mean, in fact, I came to hate it.
by the end of it. And so it's safe to say that the process of localizing a TV series or a movie is very different from localizing a game. Which one would you say was easier or more fun?
Not Pokemon.
Not Pokemon. So it's not because it's a TV series, but it's because it's Pokemon, or is it a matter of being a TV series versus games?
In the case of Pokemon, I had to keep it in script format, and so I had to. And there was a lot of. I couldn't change the names. The names were already decided, so I had to do a lot of glossary checking to see what was the name of this Pokemon here, and I could tell you a good story about how it ended for me on Pokemon.
Please do.
It came to be that, first of all, the studios changed hands a couple times, and eventually it fell into the hands of a rather avaricious, nasty group of people who weren't fun to work with at all. And the original studio came to be, replaced, and then they started to pay the voice actors less, and some of them left disgruntled, and they replaced them. So the working environment itself became less and less fun. But in any case, it was the last season of Pokemon when they introduced Professor Oak's brother. And he had this odd thing where he would, his face would transform into a Pokemon face, and he would make a pun based upon the name of the Pokemon that he was doing an imitation of a Pokemon. And so imagine that you've got a Pokemon whose name is, I don't know, Muffino or something like that. But he would look like Muffino, and he would say something like, that was a delicious Muffino, or some kind of joke like that.
Yeah.
The problem came to be that the English name was completely different than the Japanese name. And so...
What a nightmare.
Because he looked like a character, you were restricted to using the name of the character that he looked like, but you couldn't keep the same pun, obviously.
Right.
So he might say something like, "Good morning, go," and, the character he was looking like was it's difficult to explain this here because it's in Japanese.
No, but also imagine this all the time happening constantly whenever he was on screen. It must have been a nightmare.
It was impossible to do, really. And I told the Pokemon people, I said, we're going to have a real problem here this season because this character does this, and let's think about some creative solutions together.
Yeah, please, kill him off screen soon rather than later, please.
And I think they were up with something like, just shut up and translate it.
How lovely. Lovely people.
Yeah. So by that point, I've been doing it for 10 years, so I gave them some kind of a angry reply, and then they said, okay, thanks, you won't be working together anymore.
It feels like a nightmare, especially with a character that does it constantly. My God. Oh, wow. Wow.
Yeah. Long and short, with regards to the Pokemon movies and the Pokemon anime, I did the rough direct translation.
Okay.
And that's about it.
Would you say it was more enjoyable working on the movies or the TV episodes? No difference?
I just translated it at home, direct translation, sent them off.
Okay. And speaking of the actual localization, because again, you are in the localization business, even of course to this day, thanks to your company, Dragon Baby. By the way, what an awesome name, by the way. I love it. It's so cute. It's so lovely. I was wondering, when did you establish it? And is there anything you are currently working on that you can talk about, share with us or something?
2020. I think it probably goes back to about 2018. But I think I established the company in 2020. We're working on a lot of stuff. I can't talk about anything that we're working on. But, we've done some big stuff for Capcom. We've really done a lot of stuff. I mean, we do all languages, so there's quite a lot of things we're doing.
Great. And look, I knew that you probably wouldn't be able to talk about anything you were working on at the moment, but I thought it didn't hurt to ask. But for sure, I mean, I'm sure that people don't always realize the huge amount of work necessary to translate and, most importantly, to localize a product coming from abroad, especially when the culture is so different, like from Japan. How do you, in general, approach localizing a game from beginning to end? Do you have a method like?
Well, every project's really different. These days, as a company, we try to find translators that love the genre or love the series that they're working on. The most important thing is to be passionate about it. You have to really, really care. You have to go above and beyond. And so it requires a lot of love. As far as the process goes, it's quite different than it used to be because we have tools for these things now. It's much more organized. There's not some of the people hearing these stories and that think it's all chaos. It's not so chaotic anymore.
Not that much, at least.
It's quite established, the procedures for doing it. And now the tools, the technology are out there to organize things in a much better way. Things don't slip between the cracks.
So it's easier today than it was before.
Yeah, I mean, it was the Wild West. I was doing it really.
You were pioneering.
Yeah, I just picked up and did it. But now, the people doing it now have grown up playing the games I translated. In one sense, the only thing that hasn't changed is that understanding the author's intent, understanding what's going on in the game, understanding why a line was written to sound a certain way. What was the purpose of this line? What was it trying to convey? Is there a hidden meaning in here? Does the nuances of what's happening in the scene? Is this person angry at this person? Is this person in love with this person? So you can't just look at the words and then translate them. You have to have complete context, and you have to have the freedom to change it enough to keep what is there, but isn't necessarily in the words.
Right. Yeah, and I believe that the most difficult concept to point to get across is to the uninitiated sort of people who are new to localization is that really it's impossible to keep it 100% because the language is so different that there is a margin of loss. It's just and then it comes to choices. I believe that there is multiple ways of translating and localizing, and not necessarily one is right and one is wrong. At certain point, it comes to the translator, to the localizer, to take ownership of the translation, say, I will go this way, it's my way. Your way is not necessarily wrong, it's a different style,
I think the worst mistake that you can make is try to play it too safe.
Okay. It doesn't sound natural this way. It's the risk of sounding not natural is so high, I believe, in that case.
Yeah, it's not just the... Of course, yeah, what you say is true. You want it to sound natural, but when you're translating something, especially from a really foreign language like Japanese, there's often some ambiguity. You're not quite sure, maybe sometimes you're not quite sure what's going on, or you're not sure how you want to emphasize this or that. And so it's much safer to play it safe. You would keep it bland. Let's put it that way. Especially if you have 4 translators working on the same game.
Right.
Problem is, Lucian, is that if 4 people are translating it, they're all going to have slightly different styles, right?
Of course.
And so, and also add on to that the fact that a translator working as a freelancer for a company may be criticized by taking a risk. This word isn't in there. Why did you add this word?
And then you have to stand for it.
You have to either stand up or change it. And so it's going to take your time. Maybe you won't get another job from them. So a new translator is often what they do is they kind of play it safe. And what you wind up with is a very beige, bland translation that has no flavor.
Yeah. And so I was wondering one thing out of personal curiosity. How would you describe your typical workday? I mean, it feels like a job interview question, but I'm genuinely curious, like what it's like the work routine of a localizer?
Well, the thing is, I'm really less of a localizer now than I am a president of a localization company.
Okay.
So, I was a Japanese to English translator, and I was a freelancer for most of my career, a single translator. And when I would get a big job that I couldn't handle by myself, I would bring in other freelance Japanese to English translators. Occasionally, occasionally I would get asked if I do other languages, and I would try to start a company. I must have started 4 or 5 different companies that started and failed. And Dragon Baby was successful, and now I'm the president of this company that's sort of medium-sized-ish. We're a small translation company, but they call us a boutique translation company. But we're a little bit unique in that, though we're a boutique translation company, we do all languages. We've got an enormous database of translators that we work with regularly in all these different languages. So now my job is much more in the role of president. So that means sales and things like that.
Okay.
As far as getting in there and working 14 hours, 16 hours a day, trying to, I don't really do that anymore. But if I got a very, very special project and someone said it's got to be Jeremy Blaustein doing it, I could probably have my arm twisted. But frankly, at my age, I'm not the best choice really to be translating in the style of a 20-year-old character.
Right.
I don't know. I haven't lived in America in a long time.
Right.
I don't know the kind of slang that young people use and stuff like that. So, and there's a lot of hungry freelance translators who also want an opportunity, who want to build a career, who want to show what they can do with their passion and stuff like that. So I'm enjoying being a bit of a mentor these days.
Right. And what advice would you give to people who want to start within this industry?
As a translator?
Yeah.
Well, my advice would be use every resource that you can. Everybody that you know, keep knocking on every door you can knock on. Eventually you will probably succeed, as long as you have a lot of passion and love for what you're doing, because that's what it takes. And also be brave in your translations, and be courageous and be creative.
Right. Makes sense. And speaking of the actual translation, you said previously that there are tools and new tools. And how do you approach the delicate balance of using automated tools versus spicing up things manually? Which direction do you prefer?
None of the tools that we use are automated. There's no machine translation. We absolutely reject any idea of machine translation. We will never do it. So the tools that I'm talking about are simply, machines that maintain, for example, a glossary, so you can check what the official translation is, or if something's already been translated a certain way, to make sure there's no inconsistencies or spelling mistakes. It's things of that nature. It's never anything that affects the translation creativity or anything like that.
Right. That's exactly the answer I wanted to hear.
That's organizational stuff.
Right. And
I mean,
please go.
At Dragon Baby, we really believe that the translation, localization, is part of the production process, and we're writing game content. We're involved in the production of game content. It's not simply a process of translating what's there and magically, because the Japanese or because the German was good, then all you have to do is translate it and the English will be good. It doesn't work that way. You have to, in each language, you have to reach into that culture's sort of, the thing that tickles, you're Italian, so there's certain things that only an Italian's going to get, you know?
Of course.
A certain flair or a certain flourish. So, okay, but you're going to know that. So people only translate into their own language.
Yeah.
If anyone has the misconception that if you become fluent in Japanese, you can translate from Japanese to English and English to Japanese, that's a mistake. Only a Japanese person can really translate it to Japanese.
The target audience. I agree.
99% of the time. I mean, unless you're some kind of a absolute Superman freak, you're not going to be translating into a language that's not your native language.
Yeah. I thought that could be the case. It was a mistake I myself did. I thought that I could translate into English, but honestly, I can translate into Italian.
Yeah, and my Japanese is very, very good, but I never would translate into Japanese.
Yeah, I understand. And you touched on a very interesting subject about the AI. Do you ever feel that an AI could reach a point to actually replace the professional figure of a localizer, or will there always be the need for a human localization process, or at least to reach a certain standard of quality?
Well,
because it feels like we are going there. I don't want to believe it, but it feels like we're going there.
Yeah, I mean, people want to save money. But, you know, it depends upon the game. I mean, there's games that really the content is not that, the creativity of the content's not that important, you know. And some people might decide, I mean, even in any game, for example, there are menus, there are, you know, or lists of items, for example, which is different than doing dialogue. So, I don't know, it's, I think that question might, you know, you might turn that back on your audience and say, what is acceptable to you, you know, as fans. I'm afraid that people will begin to settle for less, and less is what they'll be getting if they get an automatic machine translation. They're definitely getting less. There's, you know, I mean, would you like to read a book that was written by AI?
Not really.
I wouldn't.
Not really. Changing subject just a little bit. Do you need programming abilities to do localization for video games, or are linguistic tools enough?
Yeah, they're enough.
Not AI tools.
No, you don't need any programming.
Cool.
You need to learn to operate the CAD tools.
Yeah.
But,
and what would you say to people that there are quite a few who say that basically localization is censorship, or they are at least linked one another?
I would say, I don't know what you're talking about. What I'd say, what do you mean?
Right? Yeah.
Because most of the people that say that, they are coming from a terrible misconception about the nature of translation. They're usually not bilingual people, so they don't kind of get it on one level. They think that if a word is changed, and by looking up the word in the dictionary, they can say, aha, that word's different. You're trying to change the author's intent, or you're changing their words. It's a very short-sighted and small-minded way of understanding the complexity of, you know, when you and I were talking informally about this offline, I think I tried to explain it in the following way. It gets a bit theoretical, if you don't mind, but
Of course.
and this is something that what's his name said from what's that director? Twin Peaks and
Lynch?
yeah, David Lynch. Yeah, this is something David Lynch was talking about. He was explaining where ideas come from. And this is his idea. He goes into like transcendental meditation and he kind of plunges into his subconscious and he looks for ideas. And he describes it in the following way. He says that when he finds an idea, it's this idea that's existing in the kind of the ocean of ideas. You know, imagine like a great, enormous ocean where instead of fish, you've got all these different concepts and ideas. And he dives into it, he pulls something out, and he pulls it out and he expresses it in the language of a visual medium, film, which is what he does. But the visual medium of language is it's a language of cinema, and we have a language that we speak, English, Japanese. But when an author expresses something in their own native language, I feel that they're expressing a concept, they're expressing an idea, and they're doing it through the only system that they have, which is their own language. But it's an imprecise tool. Somewhere behind those words is an idea that they can only approximate through language or film. Now, a translator, at their best, what a translator is doing is trying to reach into the mind of that creator and see what was the original source of the idea, separate from the language. I hear an idea in Japanese, but behind that Japanese person's creation is something universal that I can also grab.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to grab the same idea that they grabbed and express it in my language.
I agree. There is never, I believe, honestly, that censorship is definitely the least of the intents of the translator and localize. Unless there are maybe some guidelines from the company that maybe, but it's on their side.
On the extreme sides of the situation, of course, with all of the things being translated today and the number of translators there are and people, of course, you're going to find some people that have a quote-unquote agenda or something that they want to express.
Right.
These are the extremes. And to throw dirt on the entire population of localizers or the profession of localization and say that all localizers suck, but all translators are good, it's nonsense. It's absolute nonsense. People get into this because they love games. They get into it because they want people to have fun. Very few people get into it because they want to censor another person's work. So honestly, it's just kind of just culture war nonsense. People arguing with each other over nothing.
Right. Look, thank you so much. I think it's time to wrap it up. But before we do, one last question it's not really a question, more of a space for you to say anything you wish to our viewers, your fans who followed your work over the years. So what would you say?
Wow, first of all, I'd say thank you. I can't believe I have fans. I would say that I really loved, translating all these games, and nothing makes me happier than the thought that I inspired people or I made their days a little bit better. It's awesome. It's absolutely awesome, and I feel really privileged to have had this career and this opportunity. And that's about it. Thank you, everybody, for all your support. And that's about it.
Awesome. Well, guys, I'd say we can now let Jerry go. We've kept him here for long enough. And you've been very patient. You've answered so many questions today, and I truly, truly appreciate your honesty about the topics we've been discussing. Thanks so much for your time. You really made my day, and I'm sure that of our viewers as well.
It was my pleasure as well.
That really wraps it up. I hope you guys enjoyed this nice little talk with our special guest, Jeremy Blaustein. If you did, don't forget to like and subscribe so that I can bring you the best quality content. But really, at the end of the day, I just want to thank you so much for spending some of your precious time watching this video to the end. I wouldn't be seeing you in my next one, but until then, stay safe, play safe, world gamers.